Greetings everyone, I'm DonTheCrown, and today I want to talk about the upcoming League Harvest. On June 19th, Friday, PathFX will be launching a brand new league, which pretty much includes a fresh start for the economy, fresh characters for everybody, and a brand new league mechanic, that is the Harvest League mechanic, which is going to be very, very interesting, very, very fun. This typically happens about 4 times a year with a brand new league. If you haven't already watched the official trailer, I highly recommend you go do that now. I'll link that down in the description below. But I'm going to kind of talk about my thoughts and feelings after watching the trailer itself, and after reading through some of the new releases they've done on Reddit. I wanted to do a video not necessarily right as I saw the trailer for the first time, but more after I've kind of digested my thoughts about it a little bit. And so that's this video. Let me know if this is the type of thing you'd like to see down in the comments below. Now, this league is going to be very different compared to the previous leagues, because no longer are we going to be seemingly receiving this gigantic loot explosion of stuff that is typically considered previous league rewards. So unlike in Legion or in a lot of basically every other league where we're just getting tons of different types of loots from stuff that was previous league rewards, we're not really going to be getting that. Instead, they're working on new types of rewards, where as you plant seeds and fight these monsters and gather life force, there'll be a lot of brand new crafting options, and even some non-crafting things that are becoming out of this. And so this is very neat. This is very interesting to me, because we haven't really seen too much innovative rewards coming out of new leagues for a while. And don't get me wrong, having prior league rewards more accessible has been a really great thing. I really liked how they handled catalysts after Metamorph League, where in Metamorph League I barely used them because they were so rare. Doing one prismatic catalyst was 20 chaos or more, and so I just never used it. And now, this last league, I had so many catalysts that I was hitting it up on basically all of my jewelry pieces, which is a really good change. I like that a lot. And that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't made it more accessible in other league mechanics like Delirium. Now, another thing that's going to be very different about this league is we're actually getting brand new bosses added to the content. It's been since Legion League that we've gotten any real new bosses. Delirium bosses are kind of there, okay, I'll give you that. But these are bosses that you're going to be able to seemingly go out and kind of target farm and fight. And so I think that's going to be really, really fun. And there are apparently 4 new bosses, one for each of the type of seeds that you can plant, Vivid, Wild, and Primal, and then one Uber boss, which is really cool. I love doing bossing. It's one of the things I like to do. I do a lot of bossing servicing on my channel, and so having brand new bosses, it's a big deal. I like that a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing the cool new mechanics that these different bosses have. And so that is exciting to me. Now, along with all these changes, they're coming to other things as well. And so we're going to see updates to war cries, to slams and two-handers in general, also brands and the passive tree in general. The passive tree is going to be getting a whole bunch of new keystones. A lot of them are coming off of the timeless jewels that you see from Legion mechanics, but then those keystones that are getting removed from the timeless jewels are actually going to be replaced with brand new keystones. So we're going to be getting a lot of interesting passive skill tree changes, especially on the kind of the heels of Delirium League, where we saw so much shake up in how people are doing their typical passive tree. It's going to be really interesting to see how these new keystones really shake it up even more. And I'm really hoping, because they're also said that they're going to be reworking and adding some new stuff, that we're going to see a lot of interesting pathing, and it's going to be a lot less cookie cutter for your average build, basically depending on what you want to do with it, which I think would be a really good thing for Path of Exile. Now, in terms of war cries being reworked, I'm a little bit hesitant about this one, because until last league, almost nobody really used a war cry, unless you're doing enduring cry to get some endurance charges, and that was not very frequent. But with this last league, with all the Warcry cluster jewels, Berserker became incredibly powerful with this ability to generate a ton of rage per Warcry. I have a Berserker who's generating 15 rage per Warcry and like a 1.4 second cooldown. So pretty much able to stay in Berserk for a long period of time. And a lot of the people are using like crit multi Warcry and things of that nature, and it's been really powerful and really cool. And so they're nerfing Rallying Cry, they're changing it kind of, and so they're taking the damage away from there, but they're also adding a whole bunch of new Warcries. These Warcries will do something called exert your attacks, which basically give it new effects or make it stronger. And we haven't really got much detail about exactly how that's going to work just yet. So I'm very excited to see the type of changes they made with this, but I'm also nervous that they're going to like really mess up Warcries and make them like not something you really want to use. Warcries historically have pretty much been almost unusable in normal combat because as melee you're already putting yourself in harm's way to be in melee range of monsters, and then they want you to cast a spell that, like, you know, you need to be in melee range basically to hit them with, and while you're casting the spell you're not doing any damage. Now, I noticed that a lot of the new Warcries knock things back, or at least Seismic Warcry does, and so, okay, that might help a little bit, but if you're like fighting a boss, that's not going to knock the boss back, that's not going to give you any defenses. And so we'll have to see whether or not these are actually going to be used. The only reason I ended up using Warcries is because I have the instant Warcry node, and it would be really neat if they made Warcries like a lot faster to cast, or maybe just baseline instant, so they're more likely to be used, but I don't really see that happening. So judgment's kind of out still on whether or not Warcries are going to be really, really good, or kind of a noob trap, but we'll have to see how that goes. Now, in terms of slams and two-handers, we haven't really seen the exact numbers of what's going on here. We've only seen like one melee weapon rework so far, and it was a claw where they really didn't change anything about it to make it good, so I'm a little bit concerned. Two-handers, for the most part, have needed a lot of love. There's very few two-handers that have kind of like survived the march of power creep, and in fact GG like slaughtered the best way to craft a weapon, which was the leveled fortify to like your socketed gems in your two-handed weapon that also gave you physical damage that we had back in Legion League. They just destroyed that, and that was like a big blow to crafting melee weapons. And honestly, this last league I didn't craft a single rare weapon outside of like getting to maps, and so I'm really hoping that they do a little bit of a touch up, brush up with a lot of the two-hander bases, maybe eventually some of the one-hander bases as well, and some of the crafting options for melee, because right now there's not really much of a reason to use anything besides like a Paradoxica or like maybe a nice two-hander sword. Like I know a lot of people love Starforge, Terminus Est, even like Azirius Disfavor is not terrible, but when you compare all of these things to kind of the damage you can get from like a spell-based weapon or even like a bow, these are just years behind now at this point. So hopefully they're going to improve the two-handers, but I'll have to wait and see kind of with that. And there is also a lot of questions about how they're going to make slams better. It seems like right now they want to like kind of really lean into that big, slow attack being good kind of template that they're working with, which is okay as long as they find some way to make it so that melee feels alright when you're attacking slow. Because right now things like Leech, Impale, Movement with Leap Slam all feel terrible when you have a slow, beefy two-hander, and so you feel extremely penalized for playing the very slow two-hander build when you like can't travel around the map. While you're busy swinging your big two-hander, you're getting killed because there's a huge time between when you actually activate your attack and when it actually lands. And so we'll have to see how that goes. One of my big hopes is that, because I see a lot of Earthquake in a lot of the preview videos, that they are making it so that Earthquake's like basically mandatory hat enchantment, which makes the aftershock happen faster. is like completely removed, and that is baseline. They just make that faster, period. Because right now it's really silly to me that Earthquake, which like should be almost like a signature melee skill, is completely unplayable without that enchantment. Basically, if you don't have that hat enchant, your build feels so much worse than with the enchant, and I just don't like that feel. Now, if they were to lean into hat enchants, really making builds different, sure, but it's kind of like the equivalent of like having Cyclone not be able to like do any AoE unless you have a hat enchant. That's just not the case, and so I hope they make some changes with that. Well, it's kind of yet to be seen what changes they're making to what melee skills. I'll definitely go over that in detail once we get the information. But I'm excited that they're at least doing something for two-handers. Two-handed changes have been on my like stuff that people tell me is coming next League board since Legion League. Because after Legion League, it was kind of like obvious that two-handers still need work. And so it's been a while since, you know, Melee's gotten like specific love to changes. And then it'd be nice to see what they do. Now, in terms of brands, from what I understand, I've never played a brand character, especially not the Archmage brand, which is pretty popular. Brand playstyle was being drastically revamped. So as opposed to being the type of thing where you cast out a few brands and then pull them with you through the entire map, it's now going to feel kind of more like smart totems. That's at least what I've been told. Don't, you can tell me if I'm wrong once the league actually starts and we get to play with the changes. But they're also adding some new interesting brands, like the Arcanist brand I think looks kind of neat. Also the new cold damage over time brand also looks pretty cool. And I'm looking at like maybe doing a build with like one or two of these like later on the league, maybe like week 4 or 5 or something like that. I'm very interested to see what they do with those. Passive skill tree, we kind of talked about that. Like they're adding things for rage, they're adding things for just a whole bunch of different mechanics that have been added since they've kind of like reworked the passive tree recently. And rage, for me personally, is something that like has kind of been on the back burner, it seems like, almost for GDG. Like I kind of equate it to Impale. So Impale, when they first added it with Shattering Steel and Lancing Steel, was like, what? We need an Impale support. We need Impale on the passive tree. We need Impale anywhere else besides like just Champion. And so they finally got around to it. Impale pretty much helps support a lot of the popular melee builds now at this point. And so hopefully, like Rage right now is kind of this bad spot where unless you're a Berserker or a Scion, getting Rage pretty much requires you to use the Rage support, and that's like okay for leveling, but you do not want to use that in maps. Hopefully they make that support a little bit better. And with the new cluster jewels, there's like a couple cluster jewels that allow you to get Rage. So hopefully Rage just like goes a little better. And I think this will be like a nice buff to other melee classes that aren't Berserker. Or it could also be a huge buff to Berserker, because Berserker gets a bunch of benefits for having Rage. So we'll have to see exactly what type of changes they're making. But I'm very much looking forward to that, because I think Rage could be a really cool mechanic, and Berserk itself can be a really cool mechanic, as long as it's not like eating all your Rage almost instantaneously, to the point where it's like, why would I even use Berserk? Because I like get a very short temporary buff that like takes me 40 seconds to fill my Rage all the way back up. It just doesn't make any sense. So moving on to some of the league rewards that we're going to see, like kind of been previewed, there's going to be a lot of crafting rewards. GG has stated that kind of what they want to make sure this is also good for leveling, and so there'll be a lot of very powerful leveling crafts that you'll be able to get. And for example, like they kind of showcase the physical exalt. So you're kind of familiar with Conqueror Exalts, where like if you take a Conqueror Exalt and you slam it on to a item that doesn't have any influence at all, it'll add that influence, and it'll also add a guaranteed mod that's from that influence type. So like a Hunter Exalt will give you a Hunter mod on your item. Basically, what like a physical exalt will do. This is not actually a physical exalt, but it's like the crafting thing where it'll like add a physical based mod. And so if you have a sword, for example, that has like physical percentage, physical flat, and you slam a physical exalt onto it with the crafting bench, you'll get hybrid physical, most likely. And so that's really good for leveling. Lots of times for melee, you're kind of stuck every few levels taking a rustic sash, a blacksmith's whetstone, and the next highest tier up melee weapon you can get, and crafting that, and then kind of like living with a percentage physical weapon for a little bit until you get the next highest base, and you're kind of like struggling your way through. But if you can go out and get yourself a weapon that has percent physical and flat physical, that weapon will last significantly longer than it would otherwise. So I think this could be a really great thing. And also if you're like finding essences along the way, like Essence of Contempt will give you flat physical, and you could slam percentage physical on that as well. That's going to be really great. Now, apparently they're going to make these pretty common during leveling, but then later on kind of like taper them off at the end, so like when you're actually in endgame, you're not going to be able to just like slam physical mods on all your item level 83 weapons, which would be great. But I think that's going to be very good. I kind of hope that they maybe, I mean, cross my fingers, look at a little bit of melee crafting right now, because there's a lot of things that are just not very good for melee crafting, and ever since like the multi-mod changes, it's not really all that good. I know I owe you guys a Paradoxica video talking about like why I didn't bother crafting any melee weapons this league, and I'm gonna kind of wait until we see patch notes to put that out. But yeah, I hope they kind of make some improvements to melee crafting and melee weapons, because I don't really think right now it's very good to craft those. But other things could be very, very good. Like there's also sorts of elemental slams that you can get, which means you can pretty much guarantee resistances onto items, which is really great for solo self-found. I think overall this league's going to be very nice for solo self-found, and going to make it so that you're able to pretty much round out your gear a lot easier than ever before, especially with like low amounts of currency. But there's also other things that are coming out of the league content that are not crafting rewards. And so we've seen some of these already, like the Uber Lab, or the Uber Lab of Fortune, or upgraded scarabs and things like this, or like upgraded flasks that have like an enchant to them. And so it'll be really interesting to see exactly what GGG is going to do with all this stuff. And this is going to be, I think it's going to be a wild league. This league reminds me a lot, kind of looking at it, as Bestiary League. And Bestiary League was really hit or miss. In the beginning of the league, everybody hated it because the mechanics of actually dealing with the league was a nightmare. Probably the worst league that they ever launched. It was very hard to do anything. The entire system was really like kind of thrown together, and yeah, it wasn't very good. But by the time Bestiary got to like week 5 or 6, it was my favorite league of all time. And that was because you could do all this crazy crafting, things that you could never do before. You can make really great items, and there was a lot of different ways that you could like look at stuff and be like, how could I use this particular beast to potentially change things around? Capturing the beast was a lot easier. And so I'm thinking that this league's going to be the type of league where if like you just want loot explosions, if you like looking at like crafting projects and trying to figure out how to make things really, really good, this might be a good league for you. Now, don't forget though that they've added Delirium to the core game, and the way that they've added Delirium to the core game is completely different from every other league mechanic they've done so far. And so the way Delirium works is because they say because Delirium affects other league content, the more other league content you have on your map, the more likely you are to find Delirium, which to me hopefully means that if you are juicing your map, and what that means is like using scarabs and master missions and like maybe even prophecies or sextants to add content to your maps, hopefully you're finding Delirium a lot. And then Delirium apparently is going to drop a lot more cluster jewels than it did before. Basically, every single reward tile you earn is a 25% chance additive, adding up to a guaranteed cluster jewel, which is really awesome. Very, very awesome. It means that cluster jewels are not going to be completely rare. You're not going to be scrambling to pay exalts and exalts for a cluster jewel you need, I hope. At least not for the base. But this also means that things like Simulacrum will be still probably available, and that's all good things. So although the loot explosion won't be coming from the actual Harvest League mechanic, we're kind of getting Delirium too. So that's going to be very interesting. Now, if you're worried, oh my gosh, my computer was totally exploding during Delirium, I don't know if I can do it again, Don. Well, they've also introduced the new Vulkan renderer. So the DX11 engine's kind of getting phased out, and they're using Vulkan, which a lot of people had a lot of good results with. Right now it's just in beta, so some people are still having some issues with it. But from what I've heard so far is a lot of people have seen a lot of good stuff from Vulkan, and then a few people have had issues with it. I'm probably still going to league start with DX11 because I don't want to crash and go back into queue at the start of the league, but I'll probably be switching over to Vulkan pretty early on in the league. And so yeah, that's my general thoughts on the league. There's still a lot of information that needs to come out. Thankfully, Bex does a really great job of giving us a lot of info over a long period of time, keeping the hype train kind of rolling. They do a really great job with that. As soon as we get more detailed melee stuff, I'll be going over it completely and giving you guys my opinion, and hopefully we'll see some good stuff. And if we're unsatisfied with the level of changes they're making, maybe there's enough time to complain. But hope you guys had a great one. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you again next time.